Hi everyone, I'm Liz and welcome back to Elizabeth Ann Can Stitch. Welcome back to another Stitchmas video. In this video, we are going to be finishing cross stitch into a little pillow with some rickrack and some velveteen and a hand sewn closure. This pattern is called Christmas Doodles by Heart in Hand, and I stitched mine on 40 count vintage country mocha with all of the called for flosses. I'm really happy with how it turned out. It was super cute, quick. It took me about maybe an hour and a half start to finish to put together, so definitely doable. So yeah, I'll let the video play now. Enjoy. Hi everyone, welcome to the craft table. So right now I have this Christmas Doodles piece and I know I want to use this velveteen on the back. I think it's just super rich and looks really good with this dark red. And now I need to pick out some trim. I may actually make the final decision after I put the pillow together. Well, that's not true because if I want to do rickrack, I might sew it in. But yeah, let me play around with these trims and decide which one I think I might want to use. Like right off the bat, this might be the winner because it's like the same color. This is actually Berry Crush by Lady Dot Creates, and this is Chianti, also by Lady Dot Creates, but look how similar it is. And I feel like if I sewed this into the edge, so just like a little bit's peeking out at the edge, that might be really, really pretty. So this is probably like in the lead, but let me try some other things. This would also be really pretty, just like a little kind of soft white pom-pom trim, but I don't think it's winning for me on this one. This is what's known as a bag of bits, and Lady Dot Creates Lois. She puts these up in her Etsy every once in a while, and they're amazing. Helen D from East Coast Crafter is the one who turned me on to these, and it's just a bunch of random offcuts and maybe some irregulars from her stash, or from, you know, like her store, and she packages them up really cheaply, and so I love them because I can usually find some really good pieces in these for really inexpensively. And so I see this kind of purpley color, it's dark red in here, and again it's like the exact same color as my velveteen, which I actually really like, and then this would just get hand sewn. Ooh, see, now that looks really good too, but honestly I think I'm gonna go with the rickrack. Okay, yep, so this is gonna be the winner. So this is a Lady Dot Creates Chianti rickrack, and then the velveteen is Lady Dot Creates Berry Crush, and I'll put a link to her shop in the description box below because I use a lot of her products for finishing. Okay, so I'm gonna set the trim aside for now. And first thing I need to decide is how big I want my little pillow to finish. So the design itself is about 3 1/4 by 3 1/4. And so I like to leave at least a 1/2 inch on each side, that, you know, that way the design doesn't kind of get lost in the edges of the pillow. And so I think what I'm going to do is actually do 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to add an inch to each side, which means I'm going to cut this square out 5 1/4 by 5 1/4. And I think that'll give me plenty of room on the front, so that the design, you know, doesn't kind of get sucked into the seams of the pillow. If you make the pillow with too little margin and then you overstuff it, you can kind of lose some of your design. Okay, so before I actually cut out my fabric, I want to interface the back of it. Anytime I make a pillow finish, I like to use interfacing on the back to kind of protect all of my stitching and make it a little sturdier for when I'm stuffing the pillow, and so I don't disrupt any of my pretty stitching. So let me grab some interfacing. So I'm going to be using some SF101 from Pellon, and I'm not super picky about the interfacing I use on the back of my pillows. I just like to use a light to medium weight fusible interfacing, so whatever I have on hand. And I tend to have this SF101 around because By Annie calls for it in a lot of her bag patterns, so I have several packages. Okay, so before I cut out my piece, I'm gonna go to the ironing board and I'm gonna fuse this fusible down to the back side of my piece, and that way it'll be nice and stable and I'll be able to cut and the edges won't kind of pull out of place or anything. So let me get that fused down and we'll cut it out. Okay, so you can see I have my iron-on interfacing down to the back, and you can see how much like kind of stiffer, I mean it's still soft, but how much stiffer it is rather than kind of this side of the linen, so it gives it some really nice stability. And then I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to cut out an inch margin on all sides. And I'm just using the lines on my ruler to make sure everything is nice and square. And I'm being careful right here. I have beads on this piece, so I don't want to like smash or break those beads. So I'm just gonna kind of hold gently as I cut. And then I'll flip this around. And I should be cutting right around 5 1/4. So let's just make sure everything's lining up. It is. Okay, great. And then the rest of this fabric I will use for some other pieces. So now what I need is a matching square of my velveteen. So I'm going to cut out a 5 1/4 inch square of my velveteen. And then these should line up. Perfect. Okay, so we have our front and our back. And so now we kind of need to talk about the trim. So I am gonna do a machine sewn in rickrack finish. And so how I'm gonna do that, I mean, first I'm gonna take this to the ironing board and press it, because you know what, let me do that first. Be right back. Okay, much better. So what I'm gonna end up doing is first, I'm gonna baste my rickrack right on to where I want my seam to go when I sew these together. So I'm gonna do it about 1/4 to 3/8 inch in from the edge. Usually what I do is I kind of just rest the points of the rickrack on the edge of the fabric, and then I baste by sewing right on the kind of inside of these little, I don't know, peaks and valleys, because my stitching line is going to end up running kind of right down the center of it. And so I want to baste, you know, kind of close to the fabric edge. So I think I'm going to take this over to the machine and baste it, and then we'll put together the whole pillow. Okay, so I'm at the sewing machine and I am going to sew down, I'm going to baste on the rickrack, and I'm going to do it in individual pieces. So I'm going to start with the first side and just cut myself a length, and I am going to make sure that kind of the edge of my rickrack is not all the way up to, but pretty close to the edge of my fabric. Actually, let me just think about it and make sure I want to leave this much fabric showing. Yeah, so I'm going to come in just a little bit. I'm going to leave about 1/8 of an inch margin. And I am going to baste just kind of on the right side of where my eventual seam line will go. And that's just so that it's hidden later. And so I'm going to set my stitch length to probably like a, 3.8 is fine. Okay, so that's our first piece of rickrack sewn down. And you can kind of see now how eventually when the pillow's inside out, you know, you'll have this nice little rickrack edge all the way around. It'll be super cute. So let me do the other 3 sides. Okay, so now I am just going to trim the ends of my rickrack off so they're out of the way for the next step. Okay, and so then the next step is to attach our pillow back to our pillow front. And so the way I like to do my pillows is to sew all the sides and leave a gap either on the bottom or a side to turn the pillow. And so I think I'll leave the opening on the bottom. And so what I'm gonna do is actually I'm gonna flip it over and I'm gonna just make sure everything is really nice and lined up, and I'm gonna use some Wonder Clips. Velveteen can be a little bit slippery and harder to work with than quilting cotton or linen because it can kind of move around on you. And so I really want to pin it so that nothing shifts as I sew and kind of comes out wonky, you know, when I get done with my pillow. So just gonna clip in a bunch of places, just double checking everywhere that everything's lined up. Okay, so here is the bottom, and I'm gonna sew from the front side where I have my line of stitching for the rickrack, and so I'm gonna make sure that I'm sewing just about 1/8 of an inch away from it on the inside. That way the stitching line is hidden inside the pillow. And I'm going to lower my stitch length back down to probably a 1.8. And I'm going to sew all the way off the end of the pillow. And then turn and sew down the next line. Okay, so I've got all sides done, and I realized I left a little bit too small of an opening, so I'm gonna unpick a little bit here. So let's turn this right side out and see how it looks, and then we'll address the kind of bulky corners. So I'm just going around and looking to make sure that the rickrack is all sewn down nicely and that none of my basting stitches are showing, that everything's in the right spot. That looks like it is. Yeah, I think that's gonna look so good. See the back of it and the front of it. Okay, so let me flip it right back inside out so we can trim the corners up. I just like to do this step first to kind of dry run and make sure I don't need to re-sew anything. Okay, while I have this open, I am going to reinforce the bottom edges where I'll be turning it right side out. You can see this velveteen sheds like crazy. It's not like the easiest thing to work with, but it gives such a nice finish on these pillows. So, okay, and now I'm gonna trim just a little bit of bulk out of the corners. I'm gonna cut not all the way up to the corner, but close to it, and just get some of that bulk out of my corners so that it's easier to poke those corners out and have them look nice. That's what I'm trying to do. Okay, let's turn it back right side out. And so I'm just working one of my fingers into that corner and kind of pulling on the rickrack to kind of pull the corner out as much as I can with just my fingers, and then I'll come back with a little tool. Usually I just use a crochet hook or something to kind of fully get them all poked out. Okay, cool. Let's take this over to the ironing board. Here's the trusty crochet hook to kind of make sure these corners are all as pushed out as they can be. The Rickrack definitely adds a lot of bulk, so you will have slightly rounded corners. I think it looks cute. These aren't going to be perfectly pointy, or at least not in my experience. And it helps to have the Rickrack because you can kind of pull on it to help ease that corner out. So I'm going to press all the edges, and I'm being careful not to press right over the beads and break them or anything. So I'm just going to go around the edges. And then on this edge, I'm gonna make sure that everything is folded right where I wanna sew it. So I'll iron it from the back. And then from the front. And then I'll end up hand sewing this hole closed in a little bit. But first, we need to add our stuffing. Okay, so I'm gonna use 2 different stuffing mediums. This is Mountain Mist, just acrylic or polyester stuffing. And then I also have these from Polyfil, which are called Poly Pellets, and they're weighted stuffing beads. And I really like having a little bit of weight in my pillows, but I also like the shape I get with just the plain old kind of, you know, polyester stuffing, Polyfil. So I'm gonna use a combo. So I'm gonna start with the corners and get them nice and how I want them with the stuffing. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of the weighted beads and then the rest with stuffing. So I just grab a little bit in my hand, kind of fluff it up, only to shove it back down in here. And so I start with the far corners, and I just start working the stuffing into the corner. Okay, now that I have a good layer in the corners, I'm gonna pour in a little bit of the poly pellets. And this thing, literally, you can just kind of pour like a pitcher of water. Okay, and then I'll just keep going with the stuffing into the top corners and wherever else I think it needs it. And then I'll just kind of finish it off with maybe some more poly pellets at the end. And I'm using this tailor's clapper to kind of hold it up so the poly pellets don't just fall out of it. I'm gonna add a little bit more poly pellets, and then the rest is gonna be stuffing. And so now you can kind of see how it's going to be when I sew it closed. It's got a nice kind of heavy weight. It's not heavy, but it's got a weight to it, but it's also nicely fluffy and stuffed in the corners. I might shove a little bit more in this corner. It's feeling a little flat. And so I really don't like to overstuff. This is about as, you know, full as I like my little pillows. And so the next step is going to be to grab some dark purple thread and hand stitch the pillow closed, and then that's it. So let me grab a needle and thread. So I'm gonna start on one end of the opening, and I'm just going to stick my needle up through the velveteen from the back, bury that knot, and then I'm gonna do an invisible stitch, but I've got to go through the rickrack. So basically what that's gonna look like is me coming out of the rickrack and then into the Vintage Country Mocha, the linen. Oh, let's see if I can get that going. And out about, you know, 1/8 of an inch later. And then back through the rickrack. And then back through the velveteen at the fold. And again, about 1/8 of an inch. And so I will deal with all the little fuzzies from the polyfill once I'm done. So here is what it's looking like on the front, and you can kind of see how the stitches should just disappear between the linen and the rickrack, and you know, I'll clean up the fuzzies later. So it's a little bit tedious, but it's just a couple inches, and then you have a really nicely finished pillow where you can't really tell where it was sewn together. So let me finish this up and I'll show you. So for the section I finished so far, I'm just going to use a wonder clip to kind of clamp it down so it stays nice and tight while I sew the rest of this. Okay, so that was my last stitch, and so now I need to tie off in the back. So to do that, I just take some tiny little stitches and loop, and then loop my needle through to create a little knot. I'll pull it tight and then I'll do it one more time. And then I'll go under twice and tighten that. And then I will bury that little knot. Well, let me make sure everything is all nice and tight. Okay. And then I will put my needle in right next to that little knot, and I will run it back under, like through the middle of the pillow, and pull really tight to kind of bury that knot and tail in there. And then I clip, and then the end of my thread is buried. So, okay, let me get all these little loose things lint rolled off my pillow, and then I'm gonna press it and we're done. Okay, I like to iron right at the end just to, if there's any like bumps of stuffing in there, to kind of ease those out. But yay, we have a little finished pillow with rickrack trim and velveteen backing, and oh, I just think this is so pretty. Shout out to Cecilia from Heart in Hand for giving us such a beautiful design to stitch. And I really like how the bottom, how it's sewing it up at the bottom looks. And then I have a nice clean back and I don't need to do any like patches or anything on the back. So it takes a little bit of time to do the hand sewing. It's a little bit fiddly, but I think that just took me like 15 minutes to do it. So it's really not too bad in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, there's my completed pillow. And that's our finish. I think it turned out so super cute with that little rickrack detail and the super pretty velvet. And I think the little hand sewn closure looks really nice and subtle. Yeah, this is just my favorite way to finish a cross stitch pillow, and now it's ready to set out with the rest of my holiday decor. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.